Hey there. Thanks for joining us today for the live Q&A with Christina Marfice. I'm super excited. We're going to be talking with her about her experience as a journalist. And I think you're going to learn a lot about how you can think like a journalist, about how you can pitch journalists more effectively. And, if you do a lot of outreach and things like that, just how you can level up your outreach in general and get in front of people and help tell your story and convince them that they should pay attention. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Tyler Hakes. I'm the principal and strategy director at Optimist. We're a growth-focused content marketing agency, and we work primarily with startups, SaaS companies, and other like growth stage B2B and tech companies. But we also run a growth community that's focused on all things content marketing, inbound, and SEO. It's called Top of the Funnel. You can join it for free. It's on Slack. Just go to YesOptimist, YES Optimist.com/tofu, TOFU. Today's Q&A is just one of the many educational sessions that we host for the Top of the Funnel community. We're over 300 members now. Everyone is in there sharing links and jobs and all kinds of different stuff. And we just continue to keep adding content and trying to grow that community and help create value for everyone. We have folks who are consultants and agency owners like me, or they're freelancers or in-house teams who are kind of sharing their tips and tricks. So yeah, it's just a great community. Again, YesOptimist.com/tofu, TOFU. Join Top of the Funnel. We definitely love to have you. And then I just want to make one last little advertisement, which is our YouTube channel here where you're watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps us as we're continuing to kind of grow our presence here. And of course, like I said, we've been hosting these about every 2 weeks. And so we always do them live on YouTube. So if you want to stay up on the newest live sessions, Q&As, workshops, etc. that we're hosting here, please subscribe. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's guest, Christina Marfice.
Hey, Tyler.
Hey, Christina. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really glad that we're able to get some time with Christina today. So some of you may already know her. She's a member of the Optimist team. She's a writer on our team, but she also works as a journalist, and she's a writer for some of the large media sites around the internet. So before she got into content marketing, she worked as a journalist full-time. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about her kind of experience on both sides of that aisle and what we can learn from her. Thanks again for joining us, Christina.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. Well, let's just start at the very beginning. So can you just share a little bit about your experience working as a journalist and kind of what you've done in your past and current life?
Yeah, totally. So I actually studied journalism in college. I knew I wanted to be a reporter, worked for my college newspaper. And after I graduated, I got my first job as a full-time beat reporter at a daily paper in Oregon, covering city politics. And then I kind of bounced around Oregon and Idaho for a few years, working for all weeklies and daily papers, covering mostly politics, a little bit of education, and I also did like local entertainment scenes.
Neat. Okay. So a little bit of everything then.
Yeah. Well, that's the reality of being a beat reporter at a small local paper.
Yeah. So what is, I guess for folks who may not be familiar, what does that kind of mean? Like, how do you define being like a beat reporter?
So a beat reporter is somebody who's hired by a daily paper to cover online. We would call them verticals, but in the newspaper industry, they're called beats. So like education is a beat, politics is a beat, crime is a beat. A beat reporter generally becomes like the local super expert in whatever area of news they were hired to cover.
Got it. So that makes sense. So right away, I feel like, if you're new to pitching journalist or you're, not kind of familiar with that structure, I think that's a tip right there, right? Is that,
yeah,
don't just pitch any journalist that writes for the paper. They, people have sort of their own verticals or beats, as you said, that they cover, and they're only going to be really interested in stories that are relevant to that.
Yeah, definitely true.
Cool. That's great to know. Thanks for that background. So I just want to start really general. So obviously today we're going to talk a lot about being kind of on the receiving end of pitches and what we can learn about that. So do you want to share just broadly maybe like what kind of pitches you generally receive now, or maybe what you have received in the past?
Yeah. So in the past, working for local newspapers, pitches were a lot different than they are now because I would generally get things that were really related to the hyper-local things that we would cover. As a politics reporter, I was getting a lot of not so much pitches, but like government press releases. Now, since, when was it? About 5 years ago, I left local newspapers and made the move to digital news online. And I would say now the pitches that I get just totally run the gamut. They can be literally anything you can imagine. Some of them are useful, some of them are not.
Yeah, so I mean, are like talking like products and content and all kinds of stuff.
Products, events, news, studies, and data, just all kinds of things.
Okay, cool. And like, do you have like a rough estimate? I mean, again, I don't know. I don't have necessarily a good sense, but like at this moment in time, like with the writing work that you do, what's like the volume of pitches that you receive? If you had to try to quantify it.
I would say probably 20 or so on a slow day, up to 50 on a busy day.
Oh wow. Okay, so that's that's a lot.
But I mean, not all of those are relevant to the kind of news that I write about. So my current kind of capacity in news reporting is I work as a writer and an editor for the news section of Scary Mommy on a daily basis, which, as a lot of people probably know, is a parenting site. The news section of that site isn't parenting related really at all. But we do cover news that is interesting to that target demographic of, mostly middle-aged women who tend to be mothers. And so that site has a pretty wide reach, and a lot of the pitches that I receive are related to my work for that site. But I'm also, occasionally pitching and writing stories for other sites, other magazines.
That's interesting. So I don't want to go too far off on tangent, but that's also an interesting an interesting caveat that I don't think a lot of people think about, is that in addition to the sort of like ongoing writing work that you do, where you're receiving pitches, you're also on the other side pitching stories to other people as a journalist.
Occasionally. I don't do that as much anymore now that I've moved into more content writing for the bulk of my career. But once in a while, if I come across a really cool story that I really want to write, I'll pitch it around.
That's awesome. No, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah. So again, yeah, I think it's interesting to get your perspective on this, because you are sort of on both sides of the equation there in some ways. So, cool. Well, okay. So going back to you said you had you estimate you receive somewhere between like 20 and 50 pitches a day. So I mean, how long would you say that you spend like reviewing a pitch on average?
So that really depends on one main thing, and that's the subject line. I would say just from reading the subject line, I already have probably like 75% of an idea of whether I'm interested in knowing more about that pitch.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a great thing, right? So I think there's like a lot of advice on the internet about how to pitch, do outreach or pitch or whatever. And it's like, do you use like kind of a vague like subject line or like whatever? And it sounds like your advice would definitely be focus on making the pitch as clear and as valuable as possible in the subject line.
Yeah, definitely. We want to pull the most interesting and most newsworthy piece of information out of your pitch and make that the subject line, because that's what they say about first impressions is true. You get one shot, and when it comes to pitching, your first impression is your subject line.
Wow, that's really interesting. So how would you say, like, what percentage of pitches would you say you read the subject line, just delete it without even reading it?
Probably about half of them.
Wow. Okay, so there you go, guys. If you're sending out pitches, spend a lot of time on getting that subject line right, or you're already 50% chance that you're just going straight in the trash can. That's super interesting. Okay, so let's assume, let's just kind of walk through it then. So you get, say you open your inbox, you got 20 pitches, you scan through, you delete 10. You're gonna assuming that you're gonna click into the other 10 that are interesting to you. How long does it usually take you once you actually open a pitch to decide if it's like relevant or interesting or
So the subject line should be giving me a good idea of whether it's relevant and interesting to the audience that I'm thinking of doing a story for.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would want to see, the subject line being the most important and most interesting piece of information, and then the first 3 sentences of the pitch being the second, third, and fourth most interesting and most important pieces of information.
Okay, yeah. So I think in the journalism world, we refer to this as don't bury the lead.
Don't bury the lead. It's the inverted pyramid, is what they call it in journalism, where a story is just a collection of pieces of information, and your job as a reporter is to put those pieces of information in the correct order. And the correct order is most important at the top of the story and least important at the bottom.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's
that comes from print newspaper days, when sometimes there wouldn't be enough space in the paper for all of the story. And so they wanted editors to be able to just chop off the story wherever they ran out of space, and all of the most important information would still be there.
Wow, yeah, that's super interesting. And it's funny because we were just literally having a conversation about this in the top of the funnel community. Shameless plug, but yeah, we were just talking about that and how it kind of applies to writing work in general. But yeah, that's great to know. So just to recap for everyone, what we're saying here is that 50% of your success is going to be dependent on your subject line, and of course, assuming that you get it to the right person, you have to have a good subject line that is relevant and interesting and gets them to even take the time to look at it. And then Christina was saying that the first 3 to 4 sentences, she's going to basically know if this is something that's interesting to her. So,
well, ideally, that's provided the pitch is structured in that way. My advice: structure your pitch that way.
Fair enough. Yeah. So definitely you will. It sounds like you will at least improve your odds by putting that important information at the top. That's good to know. And so what if you had to estimate? I don't know, on an average week. So if you receive 20 to 50 pitches a day, how many pitches actually do turn into a story, or do you end up using in some capacity?
That's a good question. And I'm sorry in advance that my answers to so many of these questions are going to just be, it depends.
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors at play. In my role at Scary Mommy, where I'm working there every single day, most of the time I'm just writing for them, but occasionally I do editing shifts. And so if I'm working as an editor, a lot more of the pitches that I receive are probably going to turn into stories, because I need to be assigning stories out to writers.
Okay.
As it currently stands, the amount of news writing that I do on a daily basis is so small that most of the pitches that I receive, even if they're good stories, I'm not going to end up writing them. What I will do is I'll forward them to an editor that I know, if it's a really great pitch. And then oftentimes it'll get assigned to another writer.
Okay, cool. Oh, that's interesting. Actually, so this that brought up an interesting question for me, which is that do you have people who you're like in contact with at Scary Mommy like on a regular basis, who you like have sort of like a relationship with, that send you pitches regularly?
Just a small number. That was a lot more common in local journalism days. But one of the things that they joke at Scary Mommy that I'm the unofficial Disneyland reporter, because I just love Disney parks. I stay up on the news about them all the time. And so I do actually have a contact at Disney's PR who will send pitches to me occasionally, because she knows what I write about and what performs well with our audience. And anytime I get an email from her, I'm like, great, that's an easy story for the day that's going to perform well for us.
Fair enough. That was interesting.
Yeah, not the newsiest thing in the world, but that's something that our readers love and that I enjoy writing about. So,
right, yeah. Well, that's a great point. So how do you if you're looking at a pitch, how do you sort of evaluate whether you think because ultimately as a journalist, your job is to not only just cover what's interesting, but what your readers care about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you sort of evaluate, hey, is this going to be interesting to our readers? Or do I think this is going to perform well from a traffic standpoint, or however you're looking at that?
Yeah, it's a little bit different in like online digital news like I'm doing now than it is in traditional journalism, because the focus shifts a little bit away from just conveying factual information that, in journalism, the idea is to inform people so they can be good, upstanding citizens and participate in civic democracy. In online news, there's definitely more of an entertainment bent to it. You're constantly thinking about your site's traffic because your site needs to make money.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot more focus on the demographics of your readership in digital publishing and making sure that you're producing articles and pieces and news that they're interested in.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you feel like you have a good sense for like, oh, this is going to be, this is going to really take off on Facebook or whatever, like as you're working on something?
It's tougher these days with Facebook because the algorithms have been updated in recent years to where news isn't favored. It's not easy to get a news story to go viral on Facebook anymore, but I would say we generally have a pretty good sense of what is interesting and important to our specific demographic. Most of our pieces perform pretty well. We get good traffic.
Interesting. So that leads me to one thought, which is that like as a content marketer, one way that might be successful for approaching journalists is to really dig into like top performing content from their site in the past.
Oh, absolutely.
And then kind of construct it in a similar way, or go after some kind of similar story.
That would be a fantastic way to approach a pitch.
Interesting. Okay. Sorry, I got a little bit sidetracked there, but that was an interesting sort of detour. So the next question I had was going back to the idea of reviewing pitches kind of in sequence here. What's like a red flag for you usually that the pitch is not going to be a fit or you're not interested in it?
Oh, that's a good question. I wouldn't say that there's any like specific universal red flags. The first thing that's going to make me just toss a pitch into the trash is if I read the subject line and it's just totally not relevant to anything that I cover.
Yep.
A lot of people who are pitching reporters use what a friend described to me the other day as a spray and pray method, where they shoot one kind of generic pitch out to every journalist they can find an email address for. And it's pretty obvious when you get one of those, and I generally just delete it. Other than that, I don't think there's a ton of red flags. I mean, obviously, writers tend to be picky about things like grammar and punctuation, and if the pitch isn't well written, that can be annoying. But I would say that that's not a deal breaker for me. For some pickier editors, it probably would be. If the pitch is good, but it's just not well written, I think it still has value as a story. Sure. So not everyone would agree with that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would say definitely err on the side of making sure your pitches are really clean copy, no spelling errors, no grammar errors, things like that. But I wouldn't say there are any like immediate red flags.
Okay. Okay, yeah, it's interesting. So that I guess that's good, right? So that means that like if you take the time to really craft a good pitch, send it to the right person, that kind of stuff. There's not a lot of like things that you can do that will make it go horribly wrong.
Yeah. I mean, if it's a good pitch and you send it to a person who it would be interesting and relevant to, it's hard to mess up with that formula.
Good to know. Okay, cool. On the flip side, what's like a detail or something that can be included in a pitch that like really like makes your ears perk up, or like maybe do you have like an example of something that in a pitch that you read recently where you said, ooh, that makes me interested?
Again, there's not just like one universal thing. Something that I really love is when people show me that they've taken the time to like really research who I am and what I write about, and then they can present the pitch in a way that they're coming to me and saying, I see you write about this and you wrote this article, and here's why I think this pitch is going to be interesting to you and your audience related to that. So that really shows that they did their homework, that they're really thinking about what should be important to me, which is writing something that's important to my audience, and they're approaching the pitch that way.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So that's
to see.
Yeah. All right. And so when you get a pitch like that, I mean, how is it? Just real quickly, how is it usually structured? Is it I think one of the questions that a lot of people have is like, how much like intro should I put in my pitch versus like just cutting right to the chase of like, here's the story.
Right. Yeah, that's another one that's tough to answer because I think it does depend on the pitch. The one piece of advice that I would say is it's really important when you're pitching to know how to self-edit, which is really, really difficult for a lot of people. You have to kind of check your own ego if you yourself are not important to the story, then you have to completely remove yourself from it. And that can be tough. And the pitch should be just as long as it needs to be. It should contain the information that is necessary and no more and no less. And I know that's just a really hard thing to do. It takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, that's for sure. No, but I think that's a good takeaway, which is, I think like it's funny because we talked about a similar concept with Mike when we were talking about SEO, and it's like an article should be exactly as long as it needs to be, right? It's like the same kind of concept. It's like there's no benchmark to say, okay, every pitch should be 500 words or less, or like whatever. It's just about, depends on the pitch, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's like cut as much fluff as you possibly can.
Yeah, you just need to include every piece of important information.
But it does sound like there's one of the sort of priority items might be some kind of like a warm-up thing to say like, hey, Christina, I know that you write about Disneyland, and I've got a story that's might be interesting to you because of that.
Oh yeah, definitely. If you lead with that, I'm interested.
Okay. Yeah.
Throw in a link like, hey, I saw you wrote this story. This one is kind of related to that. Like, yeah, that's a really great way to get a writer or an editor's attention.
Okay, yeah, that's super interesting. Because I think as a content marketer, especially like in the link building world, like I think people have learned a lot of bad habits about that, which is like sort of this like very generic form of personalization. But it sounds like from a journalist perspective, it's still valuable to at least like communicate to them that you understand the basics of like what they write about, if nothing else.
Yes, it definitely helps.
Okay, that's good. That's really great feedback. Yeah. So for anyone who maybe didn't catch that, right? So including some kind of a personalized approach really help the journalists that you're pitching understand that that you've looked at their work and you're pitching them something that you really truly believe is relevant to them based on what they've done in the past. Seems simple, but I think it's an easy thing to skip over. Yeah.
Did you ever read How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie?
I actually have not. No.
What?
I know. Yeah, that's one of those like. Yeah, I know it's crazy, but.
Oh, you should pick it up. But there's a chapter in there. When I read this book in college, this was the one part of it that just stuck in my brain, and I think it's been really useful in like a journalism and content marketing kind of career arc, where he talks about if you're trying to get a job, you don't approach the company telling them like why you want the job. You approach the company telling them what you can do to make them better. And I think pitching is kind of the same way. Like you don't want to be thinking about yourself and your desire, which is to, get your data or your pitch or your product in an article. You approach the writer or the editor telling them how this can benefit them, their audience, and their site.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think that's a thing that people kind of lose focus on. And I've even heard of people saying like if you like read your own pitch and if like 50% of the sentences start with I or we, then like you got to basically scrap it because like you're approaching it from just like the wrong trajectory.
Yeah, that's probably not a great pitch.
That's great. That's great to know. Yeah. So okay. So that's good. And then I think like just kind of bring it full circle to what we were talking about before. The idea being that as an editor, as a journalist, as a writer, like you have a pulse on what is successful. Like from a content perspective. And so as I'm pitching you, I shouldn't just be thinking about like, oh, you cover this, but also like, I think this is going to be, your readers are going to like it because you did a piece in the past that was really successful on this or on a similar topic or something that kind of brings that full circle.
Yeah, definitely.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Everyone is grilling me here for not reading Dale Carnegie, but
that.
To be fair, in my defense, I feel like I have absorbed most of the lessons through osmosis of everyone else having read it. So.
No, you need to read it. Tyler, come on.
That's not a good excuse.
No, it's terrible.
Okay, all right. I'll put it on my list. Cool. So I was gonna ask about kind of the like the right amount of detail, and I think that's another good question. So in most instances where you receive a pitch that you end up using in some capacity, it's something where the majority of the information is just in the initial pitch, or is there usually like a back and forth? Like, should my goal of a pitch email be to get a response from you, or for you to just take it and use it?
Ooh, that's another one. It depends. So for a couple of different examples, for the things that I would write about at Scary Mommy, an example of something where I would just take the pitch and turn it into a story with no back and forth would be like, say, a really interesting scientific study that has a finding that's relevant to our audience. Generally, there's no need for me to go talk to anyone about that. The important information should be right there in the pitch. I should be able to turn that into a story, Google for some context. I'm good to go. Another example of something we might write about is we do a lot of like cool viral artists on like social media platforms. Like one that I covered recently was somebody who like reimagined Disney princesses as like scientists and STEM workers and like made a cool art series on Instagram about this. And that's one where we were sent the pitch, but obviously the article is going to be so much better if I can talk to that artist and do an interview and get some quotes. So that's one where, you know, I love the pitch, but I want to set something up where there's some back and forth and I'm getting some more color from the person who's sending me the pitch. So it again, just kind of depends on the contents of your pitch.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So maybe the way to think about that from kind of our side as content marketers or as people who are pitching is, going back to that idea of like what your goal is, right? So in that second example you use, like maybe the goal was like, hey, I want this person to have like more of like a profile or something, right? And in order to do that, you would expect that there's some kind of a back and forth or an interview or something that goes into that, right? Whereas on the flip side, like you said, you know, a lot of the work that we do is like, okay, hey, we did this like survey or this study, or we put together this cool thing, and we just want people to like take it and like share it, basically, and kind of republish it. And so in that context, then what we really want to do is we want to, provide all the specific details so that ideally, Christina, you never even have to respond to my email to say like, can you tell me about this or that, like detail.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. So I think, thinking about that goal and context and like, what do I ultimately want this person to do, or what's the next step that I expect or hope they'll take? And is it a follow-up, or is it just move forward and kind of...
Yeah, I think that's a really important question to ask yourself as you're writing a pitch. And it can also be a really good thing to include in the pitch is what you want the result of the pitch to be. Do you want this person to just write and publish their own article on their site using this information? Do you want them to accept a guest post from somebody who wrote about it for you? Do you want them to just, use a statistic in a related article? And I think it's really good toward the end of the pitch to actually include what it is you're looking for.
That is a wonderful tip. And I've sort of been on like the receiving end of that too, where you'll get, even like a guest post pitch, but it's like worded so vaguely that you can't really tell like what they're asking. Yeah. And that's extremely frustrating, right? And of course, like I'm, 99 times out of 100, I'm just going to delete that. And the other 1%, I'm just going to respond and say like, what the heck are you even talking about? Yeah. So again, it seems straightforward, but I think people make that mistake a lot, right? Like you get so caught up in the details or the structure or the flow of your pitch, like whatever, that you just forget, like, I didn't even actually like outright ask them like, hey, do you want to do X?
Yeah, that definitely can help. It's always better to be more clear as opposed to less clear.
Okay. Great. Yeah. That's good to know. And so like, I guess just to take one step further on that, like one thing that I think, like, I know I struggle with sometimes when I'm writing pitch emails is that like, I don't want to feel like I'm coming across as like demanding. And so like, I guess like, would it be like too far for me to say like, hey, Christina, here's the thing, like, here's the findings and all the relevant information. I'd love if you'd write an article about this. Like,
I wouldn't see that as demanding at all.
Oh, good.
You came at me with that information. You were like, here are my findings. Go write about this for your site. I would be like, who does this guy think he is? But,
a lot of you polite insistence or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just basic human courtesy. Just be polite. That's all it takes.
Good. That's good to know. Okay, cool. Do you, in terms of sort of the structure of a pitch, what do you generally like to see there? I mean, like bullet points or kind of how do you find it's kind of easiest to consume?
I would say that I definitely prefer pitches that are very skimmable. So bullet points are great. I love somebody who will come at me with a pitch where they have the who, what, where, when, and why all separated out and just like one sentence answering each of those, because that gives you like a really good sense of the full story. But definitely a skimmable pitch is preferable. You know, like I said, journalists and editors are getting dozens of pitches every day. We don't have time to read a wall of text.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I like that idea of even like breaking it out as like a who, what, where, why, when kind of.
I love that. That's my favorite pitch format to receive.
There you go. You just got a killer tip there. I feel, yeah. I mean, I think again the thing that I always just keep coming back to is kind of putting ourselves in your shoes. Like, what's the I think if you approach it from a marketing standpoint, you're focused on your goal. But if you're a journalist, like you understand that my goal is to structure a story around these like kind of 5 questions, right? And so having that empathy in mind for the person that you're pitching is just hugely valuable.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Okay, great. What about so one thing that I think is interesting is like the idea of timing, or like news, like the news cycle and like news worthiness. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what role that plays in how you evaluate pitches?
Ooh, so that also, it depends on the type of publication that you're pitching primarily. For the types of digital news sites that I write for, where we're publishing every day on pretty tight schedules, generally a writer comes on, is assigned a story. That story is published within an hour or two. So it's a pretty tight turnaround. And I would say the main driver as far as the timeliness of a story in that setting is competition. If you're sending your pitch out to, say, 3 different news websites and one of them puts a story up right away, the other 2 will need to put a story up right away or else not cover it. They aren't going to write about it the next day, because at that point this story has been on the internet on a competitor's site for 24 hours. It's not timely. It's not newsworthy anymore.
Interesting.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. So a couple questions that come to mind from that. So first of all, would it make would it make sense for us for someone to offer like almost like an exclusive, or is that something that's helpful from a pitch standpoint?
Some publications might appreciate that. I think again that comes down to preference for individuals that you're pitching. If you have an established relationship with a publication and with a writer or an editor who you've pitched successfully to in the past, definitely offering them an exclusive is a great way to build a good relationship, to get them on board with publishing your stuff on a regular basis.
Interesting. Okay. And so how else might we sort of solve for that as we're thinking about pitching folks? That timing element, right? So like if I send out 20 pitches and one person picks it up, then does that immediately mean that like the other 19 are less likely to publish it?
It might be. It just kind of depends on how their site is structured, who their target audience is. If the site that published it right away is a direct competitor of theirs, they're probably not going to write about it later. If it's a kind of a different corner of the internet, that there's probably not a lot of crossover between the readers for the site that already published it and the readers for the other site, then within a couple of days, there's probably still a window. But I'm not like weeks later, most likely.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So certainly, yeah. I mean, certainly keeping the outreach, sort of tight, the window of outreach. Fairly.
Once something is on the internet, there's not really a ton of incentive for another site to write about it because it's already on the internet,
That's interesting. That's a good. Okay. So one thing that brings to mind is sort of, as you said, sort of taking like almost like a vertical by vertical approach. So it's like, okay, if I'm going to pitch Scary Mommy, then I'm not going to pitch any other like major parenting sites, but I might pitch, I don't know, some other site that's relevant to the topic, and kind of do sort of one big publication in each vertical or whatever.
Yeah, if you can frame the pitch to make the story super relevant for that many different verticals, that's definitely a good strategy.
Interesting. Okay.
But I would say your angle needs to be unique for each one.
Yeah, for sure. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. That's really helpful. So yeah, I know Ari here is asking some questions about seeing some examples of pitches, and I know Christina, we talked a little bit about that. I can keep working through some of these questions, or if you want to pull up some of those examples.
Yeah, do we want to? I pulled some from my inbox over the last few weeks, so I can.
Sure. Yeah. Let's do that. I think it's probably a good time to kind of look at some real world examples.
All right. So I have one that is a really good pitch and one that is a less than great pitch. What would you like to start with?
Let's start with a good. Let's start with a good pitch.
Okay. Let me screen share that. Let me know when you can see it.
Yep.
Okay. So, rather than give everyone a nice view of my Gmail inbox, I put these into Google Docs. So this one was one that came in actually a few weeks ago while I was on vacation. So I didn't actually write this story. This is one that I forwarded to an editor that somebody else wrote, but it just was a really good pitch for a lot of different reasons. We have the subject line up there talking about canceled graduation ceremonies and how psychiatrists are helping high school seniors and their parents cope through that. For a site that covers news that's interesting to people who are primarily parents, that's really interesting. That's really newsworthy. This was at the height of lockdowns when schools were just beginning to announce that they weren't going to come back into session this year. So it was just really timely and good information at that time. Mm-hmm. This pitch actually starts with this kind of block of text, which I would say is not ideal, but in this case, they're giving me a lot of good sources and statistics in that first paragraph. Mm-hmm. According to a report in Education Week, 48 states have ordered school building closures for the rest of the academic year. That affects 3.7 million high school seniors. That's really good context that I can include in an article that's just right there and ready for me to pull with the sources already cited. So that's super helpful. Mm-hmm. Right underneath that, there's contact information, which is great in case I have follow-up questions. And then it gets into that format that I said I love, where they're breaking this down by the what, the who, the how, and then they end with just a brief paragraph about who's sending me the pitch and why they are experts. They're the right people to get this story from.
Super interesting. Okay. Yeah, I love that, and I think one big takeaway there for me is like that initial paragraph, as you said, the context that they're providing there has nothing to do with the thing that they're pitching, other than the fact that it's just relevant to frame it, right?
Yeah, they're giving me the information I need. They're framing why this story is interesting, timely, and relevant to my readers. And that's all just really useful information to have. It's immediately makes me think this is a great pitch. My readers will enjoy reading about this.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, and another thing that I'll point out too is that there's basically no mention of I or we or whatever, right? So it's not like a normal pitch where it's like, hey, we did this study and here's what we found. No, not a lot of that. I have to skim through it again real quick and see, but no, there's not a lot of that. It's just straight to the point. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah. And just to clarify, this is the entirety of the pitch. So there was no hey, Christina, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out to you or anything like that. It just kind of got right into it.
Yeah, just straight into the pitch.
Huh. Okay. That's helpful. Yeah, that's super good to see that example. Great. What about so I think then you've got an example of a not so good one as well to share.
Let me share that one. So this one, I edited it a little bit to remove the contact information and the identifying information, so this PR person doesn't get blasted on the internet as my bad pitch. This was a less than great pitch. The subject line is time-saving and accessible snacks for kids, which, if I hadn't been specifically looking for an example of a less great pitch to use for this Q&A, this probably is one that would have been deleted unread because that subject line just doesn't really tell me anything.
Right. Yeah. There's no story there.
Yeah. And so the first paragraph wanted to reach out to share information on snacks that taste good and will make you feel good for purchasing. They're easily accessible for kids to grab themselves in the fridge and pantry, help parents save time in their hectic days versus having to whip up a snack and meal. Reading this, I'm just a little bit confused because this came at the height of quarantine. Everybody's at home. They're homeschooling their kids. They're working from home. And I'm like, everyone's at home. What are they doing that they don't have time to feed their kids and they have to have them get yogurt out of the fridge? I don't understand. And then it rolls to just introducing these two products. And as I'm reading this, I still am, I'm just confused. I don't know, are these new products that are being introduced? What do you want me to do with this pitch?
Right.
You know, as you read further into it, it turns out that actually the news angle here is that these brands have partnered with some charities. They're raising money for Feeding America. They're donating foods to food banks. But I mean, talk about burying the lead, because that information is way down in these bullet points underneath these paragraphs about these yogurt products.
That's wild.
Yeah, and so clearly that's the news angle for this pitch, but I don't think very many writers or editors would get far enough into the pitch to find it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So again, coming back to the main advice, which is don't bury the lead, right? Make sure you pull out what's actually newsworthy and timely and all that good stuff, and make sure that's where you lead. That's what you lead with. Yeah. Super interesting. And then one other thing too that this makes me think of is like I think one of the challenges that people run into a lot is that they've convinced themselves that they want to like pitch journalists or like go do outreach, but they don't really have like an angle or like anything that they're actually like pitching that's relevant. So like let's assume that for instance in this case, this donation thing didn't even exist, right? Yeah. And it's just like cold pitching. You're like, hey, I've got a great product. Don't you want to write about it? Like that's not, again, there's no story there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like this isn't interesting to my readers. They know that yogurt exists. What am I telling them?
Right. So that's interesting. So I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a way that you can think of that? You know, again, same like in yogurt brand. I'm just trying to kind of drum up some press for my yogurt brand. How could I turn that into something that might be a better pitch if that's all I've got? It's just like, hey, I make great yogurt and it's a good snack for kids.
Oh man, that's tough. I mean, that's a tough thing to pitch. I would say one of the best routes that you can take is to try to conduct some sort of survey and find an interesting finding about yogurt or snacking or nutrition or something like that kind of ties into the idea. But I mean, just products that aren't like new and revolutionary and cool are really, really tough to pitch.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to get news coverage for, especially something like yogurt.
Is there a world where someone pitches you something like this and you, I don't know, write, here are 10 healthy snacks for kids during quarantine or something, and you turn it into like a listicle or something?
Yeah, there is that world. I don't write for that world, but if you find the people that do, you know, like a site like, is Ranker still a thing? I know they did a lot of those listicle type articles back in the day. Maybe you could find like a health magazine that wants to do an online slideshow, that kind of thing. Yeah, those would be my two primary ideas.
Yeah, that's good. But I think still the takeaway for me on that is that even in that context, you're still pitching a broader story where your thing is like a part of the story, but it's not the story.
Yeah, exactly. And the other side of that is you need to find the right person and the right place to pitch it. You know, if a listicle of healthy snacks during quarantine lands in my inbox, that's not something that I cover. So I'm not going to do anything about that. But if it lands in the inbox of someone who writes regularly for a site like Ranker, maybe that's something they can use.
Totally. Yeah. Great. That's super, super helpful. While we're kind of talking through that stuff, Hiba had a question about embargoes. So maybe for folks who may not be familiar, do you want to talk a little bit about what an embargo means? And then her question is like basically how do you kind of handle that when you're pitching?
Yeah, so an embargo is when somebody, generally in PR, is sending out information to journalists before it's cleared to be published. So they'll put at the top of the press release, this is embargoed until this date at this time. It allows journalists to kind of get a head start, do some background research, get a story written, so that the very moment that information is cleared to go up in a story, they're hitting publish.
And so so how if I want to do that, well first of all, why would I want to do that as someone who's pitching journalists?
I would say the most common application for embargoes is in the arts and entertainment world, for like events. If there's like a big music festival and the lineup is being announced, maybe you give that information to music journalists ahead of time with an embargo on it that lifts once the lineup announcement goes live, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And then if that's something that I'm trying to do, what's sort of the best way for me to handle that in the context of my pitch to you?
If you are embargoing information that you're sending out?
Yeah.
I mean, all you really need to do is just write embargo at the top of your pitch and give a date and a time when the embargo lifts.
Okay.
I don't encounter a lot of embargoes lately. And when it comes to internet news, those are definitely not common because of the 24-hour news cycle.
Right.
Well, things tend to leak.
Yeah, so interesting. Like that maybe leads me to another question that I think could be relevant, which is the idea of like pre-pitching, right? So like maybe pitching something before it's like finalized or like before you've like kind of officially announced it, and in that context, it might make sense. Is that?
Yeah, I think it could make sense in that context. If you're pre-pitching and the information for the story isn't really there yet, I don't know that it's really necessary, because I don't think a writer is going to take your pre-pitch that's not fully fleshed out and go and write a story to try to beat you to the punch. Embargoes are another kind of relic from traditional journalism and newspapers, when there was such intense competition between newspapers to be the first to get a story published.
Right.
And when it comes to digital publishing and online news, they're just so uncommon. I can't even remember the last time I received anything that was embargoed.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Cool. Well, thanks. Hiba says thanks for your help there.
No problem. Hey,
Hiba. Let's see. Going back to kind of my questions here, I'd love to spend a little bit of time talking about the idea of timing, because I think that's another one that there are a lot of sort of quote unquote best practices floating around there. Are there sort of like, first of all, are there like days of the week that are the best to pitch generally, or do you have a sense of anything like that?
Probably not on Fridays or Mondays. Mondays, your inbox is just so full. It's easy for things to fall through the cracks. And on Fridays, nobody's looking for a pitch on a Friday afternoon, You're just trying to tie up loose ends to get out of work for the weekend.
That's good. That's good to know. Okay. And then, so say I pitch you on like a Tuesday and I don't hear anything, and presumably you haven't published anything about that. And I, should I try pitching you again? And then if so, how long should I wait?
I don't think there's really like a hard and fast rule for that. If you pitch someone and you get no response, it's probably generally safe to assume they just weren't interested in your pitch. But I mean, everyone's human and things fall through the cracks, and maybe they were out sick or had a busy week. There's never any harm in doing a follow-up. I would say following up within 2 weeks, like the next week or the week after. And then if you don't get a response again, probably time to move on.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So an easy cadence there might be, like a pitch on a Tuesday and then follow up either the next Tuesday or the next Thursday or something like that. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. That actually leads me to another point. So in that follow up, is there something that I'm just thinking through like the lens of stuff that we do. So for instance, would it be helpful for me to come back to you and say like, hey, Christina, I didn't hear from you on my pitch last week. I just want to share that, this story got picked up by other news stories, or like something like that could kind of make it feel more valuable or more maybe capture your interest?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So again, that kind of comes back to the competition aspect of the timeliness of news. If it was picked up by other news outlets who are in competition with that outlet and they haven't covered it yet, I mean, again, there's no harm in a follow-up, but I wouldn't be optimistic about it.
Okay.
If, those other news outlets picked it up, like say you pitched on Tuesday, another news outlet picked it up the following Tuesday, you could send a follow-up that day and be like, hey, this site just wrote about this today. Just wanted to follow up with you and see if you're interested. There could be some value in that. It kind of has a lot to do with timing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good to know. Cool. Well, we're down to kind of our last 10 minutes here. So first of all, thank you so much for all that great information. Folks who are watching, if you do have additional questions on pitching, structure, timing, etc., throw them in the comments here, and we'll try to get to them before the end here. But I wanted to shift gears a little bit, and I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how your skills and your experience as a journalist have translated to your work that you do now with Optimist and other clients as a content marketer. So yeah, I mean, just broadly, what skills from your work as a journalist do you feel like translate into content marketing work?
Ooh. Well, obviously they're both writing, so
putting words in order is good.
Yeah, making the words is a good skill to have in both fields. As a journalist, there's a lot of juggling multiple tasks and multiple deadlines that are generally pretty tight and strict, and that there's definitely some crossover there. But I would say that the one journalism skill that I found to be most useful in content marketing is, journalists tend to be just really curious people who really enjoy asking questions and then finding the answers to those questions and learning about new things. And in content marketing, you're asked to write, SEO focused blog posts and that kind of content that is often pretty in-depth and pretty technical about industries that you don't have any experience in. So that curiosity and that just hunger to be learning all the time, I think is a big advantage, because that's pretty much what the job is. Become an expert in a new industry, every week.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I think Christina, you maybe know this, and maybe other people on the stream here do, but yeah, my background is also journalism. I mean, I didn't really work as a journalist, but I studied journalism, and I think that's what has ultimately drawn me to content marketing. I think is that sort of diversity of learning that you get to, like you said, you get to really become an expert. I don't know anything about, plastic manufacturing or whatever, but if I have to write an article about it, I better learn.
Yeah, makes you really good at pub trivia.
That's a good point. I never thought about that. I do know. I know a little bit about a lot, I think.
Yeah. My favorite journalism professor when I was in college said that the best thing that you can do as a journalist is just know a ton of esoteric shit.
Yeah. Yep.
Know a lot of really obscure facts about all kinds of things. That makes you a better reporter, and I think it makes you a better content writer too.
For sure. I definitely agree with that. I think that's a good point as content marketers, is just the idea of approaching it as somebody who's learning a topic. I mean, if you're doing that yourself, it sort of shows in your writing, right? And likewise, if you're trying to help somebody understand it, coming at it from that angle of okay, if I was starting fresh and I didn't know this topic, what questions would I ask, and what information would I need? Yeah, really helpful. Cool. And I think that's actually another point about journalism, right? Is that as a journalist, I think you're trained to sort of assume that people know nothing, right?
Oh yeah.
Even if I'm writing the 50th story that week about Donald Trump or whatever, I'm going to include all the detail, all the relevant contextual and historical details about Donald Trump to make the story make sense.
Yeah, that's true. And especially coming from a background writing a lot about politics, you have to really learn how to take, complex subjects that just have a ton of history and context behind them and boil them down for somebody who is reading their first sentences about that topic and needs to understand it by the end of your article. So that's definitely a skill that really translates.
Interesting. Do you feel like you approach writing in a different way from people who come from more of like a marketing background?
So there's a stereotype about journalists that we're all very cynical. I would say to an extent that's definitely true. It's really drilled into you as you're learning the ropes of journalism to never, ever take information at face value, to always look to confirm it through independent sources. And so I would say that's the big difference between someone with a journalism background versus somebody with a marketing or any other kind of writing background is there's just that very healthy dose of cynicism in everything. Taking information with a grain of salt, always looking to confirm it independently.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a good skill to apply to content marketing though too. It's
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the thing that I often encourage people to do is always using like third-party sources and data points and stuff like that. I think as a content marketer and as a journalist, the worst thing that you can do is like make a statement with nothing to like back it up, right? Like make say this is the hardest job in the world. What based on what, right? So you really have to provide that context and some kind of evidence basically to make that statement.
Yeah, just because you're pulling a piece of information from another source doesn't mean it's true or correct.
Yeah.
It's on the internet. It's not necessarily true.
That's that's a whole other we could definitely open that can of worms. There's a whole other conversation to be had about how people use data and sources on the internet. I know there's a lot of people who complain about that. There are strings of data points on the internet that people use consistently that if you try to trace it back to its original point, like it has no origin basically, which is a big risk. Yeah. You really have to be kind of diligent about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It's something to be cognizant of.
Cool. Well, if this is a tall ask, but if you could kind of distill your journalism experience and knowledge down into tips or a tip for writers or marketers, what would it be?
A tip for just writing in general, or a tip for pitching?
I was thinking more from the context of like as a writer.
I mean, I would say the best tip that I have, and it's pretty obvious, is just always be open to learning new things every single day of your career. That's what makes you a great writer. That and reading a ton. Read books. Dale Carnegie specifically, Tyler.
Never gonna live that one down. Cool. Well, that's awesome. I think that's a good tip. I think as we said before, I think that's kind of the key trait of anyone who's a good writer, and I think ultimately a good marketer too, right? Is to be curious and to learn and strive to learn and understand new things.
Definitely.
Huge. Wonderful. Well, we're getting down to our last minute here, so I just wanted to first of all say thank you again, Christina, so much for your time here and sharing all the insights and tips and tricks and also showing us some specific examples. I think that's just hugely useful for folks who maybe don't have experience or people who do have experience to see how other people are doing it. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Great. Well, with that here on the final moment, I'll just make one final plug. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel if you have not already, and also come join us in the top of the funnel. Christina is a member of the community as well, so she'll be in there if you have any follow-up questions.
I was gonna say, if anyone has any questions, I can hang out in there today and do my best to answer them.
Great. Yeah. Just as a reminder, you can find that at YesOptimist, YesOptimist.com/tofu, TOFU. It's a free Slack community, so yeah, come join and talk about content marketing, inbound SEO, all that good stuff. Sweet. Well, awesome. Well, thanks one more time, Christina, and hope you have a great rest of your day. And thanks everyone for joining us. Bye-bye.